Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. I'm going to give Zoom a little time to make sure everybody gets in before we get started. All right, it's slowing down a little bit, so I think we can get underway. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is the Special Education Data Roadshow for spring of 2025. My name is Dominic Johnson. I'm with the Data Evaluation and Analysis Unit of the Special Education Division for CDE. I'm joined by my incredible team, including Brandy Hadegi, Dan Trong, Joseph Tan, and Milo New, as well as our host, Isabel. I also see Stephen lurking in the backstage. He may pop up at some point. Just to set the stage, as we go through this, if you have any questions, please put those questions in the Q&A. If possible, try to keep the questions on the topic at hand. Of course, if you do have other questions and they come up, don't hesitate to ask, but it will go just a little bit smoother if the Q&A questions are related to what we've been talking about. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat to talk amongst your peers and that sort of thing. I'm trying to think. This webinar is being recorded and the transcript is being saved as well. So we'll have this available as soon as we're able to get that processed and posted. Well, without further ado, let's begin. Our contact us page. If you have a CalPads question, please submit a ticket via the CalPads help menu or sending an email to calpads-support@cde.ca.gov. If you have a non-CalPads special education data question, such as timeline compliance, go ahead and send us an email at spedddatasupport@cde.ca.gov. And if you have not already, we recommend strongly to join the CalPads Special Education Data Support listserv. You can join that by sending an email to that long email address in the slide, and that will get you onto that list where you get all of the new and exciting special education data news and information first. I'll leave this slide up for a moment. If you do not already have access to or have taken advantage of the meeting materials, this is the link to those meeting materials. And Milo just dropped that into the chat as well. Thank you very much, Milo. I appreciate that. It has the presentation as well as some of the documents that we will be referencing as we go through this. So an excellent resource as well as we head into the end of the year, I say, but we are in the end of the year. Today's agenda, I'm going to talk briefly about the IEP implementation data collection, as well as the personnel data report. And then we'll jump into preparing for the end of year, including discussing the end of year deadlines, an example end of year calendar, and some audits you can do in your local special education data system to prepare for the end of the year. We'll go over data submission and error resolution and go through some of the highest frequency data discrepancies, meaning the errors and validations that occur most often statewide. I will take a break and then return to review the end of year reports. We'll talk about how those reports inform your state performance plan indicators and how we use other data from the CalPads operational data store that is end of year data for your annual determination letter. We'll round that out by talking about timeline compliance, including the Prong 2 data pool coming up in August, and using CalPads monitoring report 16.21 to stay on top of your timelines and to check those students that were on your ADL to ensure that they do have those meetings held. After that, we will talk about some other local auditing that you can do in preparation for fall 1 of 2025, because we have nothing but time on our hands right now, right? And look forward to some changes coming up in the 2025-26 academic year. A list of acronyms. We tend to speak in letters at CDE. And so you're probably familiar with most of these, but if there is anything that you're not familiar with, you have this as a reference as we're going through these materials. CSIS, our partners at CSIS who work in supporting CalPADS, offer end-of-year training to CalPADS LEA administrators. If you are a special education data system administrator or a special education administrator or any other role, and you'd be interested in taking these trainings or viewing them, you need a bridge account. Bridge accounts are available only to CalPADS LEA administrators, but they can share that account with you. So if you're interested, ask your CalPADS administrator and let them know you would like to access these end-of-year trainings, and they can share that with you. Do note that these trainings focus on the certification process and the how-to, and are not necessarily special education data specific. However, if you're curious like I am, then you may want to check them out and see what the other side talks about. Okay, moving into IEP implementation. A statewide webinar was held at the end of February. The presentation and related materials are available in the CDE box site linked in this slide. So an overview of the requirements and why are we doing this IEP implementation data collection. So one, to fulfill our monitoring and enforcement responsibilities under federal IDEA in those code sections. Two, to identify systemic issues within LEAs, help us identify LEAs that are not providing the services as prescribed in IEPs. And to categorize and identify the IEPs that are surveyed into 3 distinct percentage of completion ranges. The timeline, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had that training webinar at the end of February. The date range of IEPs, like the IEPs that you're going to be looking at over a certain range of time, it was from March 3rd until April 30th. The data collection access codes were sent to SELPA on May 1st. And then we have from May 1st until June 30th to collect and analyze the IEP implementation information for those students that we are asked to survey. And that final collection due date is June 30th, 2025. There is no amendment window for this data collection. So if you're running into issues, please don't hesitate to reach out. The procedure, how we go about collecting this data, is based on the size of your LEA, how many students with disabilities you have enrolled, eligible, and participating. We will provide a random sample to each LEA based on that size. So looking at this chart, for example, if your LEA has 1 to 100 students with disabilities, you would be surveying up to 20, depending on the actual size of your LEA. Whereas at the bottom, a large LEA with 5,000 or more students with disabilities would be surveying 500 IEPs. Please also do note, small LEAs, those LEAs designated as smalls, are only required to submit IEP implementation data during your monitoring cycle, beginning with cycle B, which is this year's cycle. Additionally, those random samples generated for the large LEAs would not include SSIDs from charters that are identified as small LEAs. In the event that a student is found on more than one list to be surveyed, we would recommend that both LEAs go ahead and report that same student in their sample, just for simplicity's sake. So the LEAs will be collecting and analyzing that local level service implementation data, however you have collected that information, whether it is a function of your special education data system or you have implemented another methodology. These measurements are based on the total number of service minutes provided for all of the services in the IEP, and that's the numerator, and the total number of service minutes prescribed, which are the minutes offered and outlined in the IEP. That is the denominator. And then that ratio will be summarized into one of these 3 categories. For 95 to 100% of services implemented is category A, 90 to 94.9% is category B, and less than 90% is category C. The numerator should include the total count of actual service minutes received for all services provided during the evaluation period. Very straightforward. The denominator is a little bit more complicated. The denominator should include all prescribed service minutes included in the IEP to which the parent has agreed to and signed, including those service minutes that were received, as well as student absences due to illness, truancy, or any other excused or unexcused absence, or any staff absences or staff shortages. Those minutes do need to be included in that denominator. However, you can exclude minutes that would have been delivered during field trips, scheduled school breaks such as spring break, statewide testing and benchmarking periods, special programming at the school site such as assemblies, and school-related emergencies. Minutes that would have occurred during those events can be removed from the denominator. And here we have a sample for a large LEA, 5,000 students, serving 500 IEPs. The calculation for a single student might look like this. For the period from March 3rd to April 30th, the student received 2,000 out of 2,160 minutes prescribed on their IEP. That's a 93% delivery rate, so they end up in category B, 94.9 to 90% of IEP services implemented. And then there is a summary for this sample data LEA that would look something like this at the bottom, with 410 students in category A, 82%, 70 students in category B, 14%, and 20 students in category C, 4%. Before I move on to the next section, are there any questions about the IEP implementation data collection? Okay, we can move on. The personnel data report. So the personnel data report is not necessarily something that everybody who is attending here has worked with or will work with. Sometimes, depending on how your LEA handles the personnel data report and the data collection, it could go to your business office or to human resources. So if it's not something you're familiar with, don't worry. It may just be going to a different department. The deadlines, the submissions were due on May 9th, and there was an amendment window open from May 10th until May 29th, and the certification and submissions were due Friday, May 30th. If you are still in the process of working on your personnel data report, if you have any questions and you need support, send an email to SEDDataReports, that's SEDDATAREPORTS, at cde.ca.gov. If you have questions about the personnel data report, you can go ahead and send that email to SEDDataReports at cde.ca.gov. The training and frequently asked questions are hosted in this box site here. You can access the materials, and then the questions that have come up have been collected and shared here. Any questions about the personnel data report? Let's keep on rolling. Preparing for the end of year 2025, what we've all been waiting for. The end of year 2025 deadlines. This is the calendar that you can find on the CalPADS website. We all know, of course, that the window has opened. The initial certification deadline for LEAs is July 25th, 2025. So that is the point at which all 4 of these submissions should be at least in an LEA approved status. We strongly recommend that you have SELPA approval at this time as well, because if you notice, the amendment window runs from July 26th through August 8th, and that is a shorter window than last year. The reason for that is that in order to publish the school dashboard earlier, they need the data earlier, so we need to process the data earlier, and the window just kind of shrinks and shrinks. So the amendment window may not be enough time for your SELPA to get through everything, help review your reports, and get you to SELPA approved status. So that's why we recommend SELPA approval by that July 25th deadline. However, you do have that amendment window running again until August 8th. At that point, SELPA approval is required for end of year 3 and 4. And there would not be any extension, or there's no further amendment window after that August 8th deadline passes. This calendar was provided courtesy of Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. And this is an example of how you can take a look at all of the milestones you're expecting to hit as we proceed towards that end of year certification and sort of get everybody on the same page. So you can see here they started with August 8th, which is that final deadline. And then they've staggered backwards looking at the milestones they want to hit, being free of fatal errors, take a look at the reports, schedule meetings to review the different end of year submissions with the people who should be involved in the report review process. And so having a calendar like this where you have the milestones laid out with clearly expected dates can keep everybody who is in the process on the same page as you're going through the end of your reporting window, whether it's the report reviewing or even back to the data uploading and the data posting and making sure everything has been submitted correctly. So we definitely recommend using some sort of an internal calendar to keep everybody on the same page. And that speaks to key staff availability. When you're looking at making this calendar, administrators should be aware of who needs to be available for each of those different milestones you're looking to hit. Who is going to need to be there when doing special education data system audits? Who is part of the data submission and error resolution process? And then who is doing the final report review and providing that final certification? Ensuring those staff are available during this time at those appropriate milestones is going to be key. You don't want to be running up against the deadline and the person who is going to review approval for your reports to be on vacation. Not that we don't want people to take a vacation. It's just that you want to be aware of these deadlines and those milestones so that you don't have a key member of your staff relaxing on a beach somewhere while you try to figure out what the next step is. So end of year 3 and end of year 4 certification. In prior years, we had recommended certifying end of year 4 first ahead of end of year 3, but that has changed slightly due to some considerations. So to ensure that all enrollments for students with disabilities are exited appropriately, we recommend certifying end of year 3 and end of year 4 together. Ideally, they would be certified at the same time using a revision created on the same day, so the information between those two submissions is consistent. If end of year 4 is finalized first and certified before end of year 3, then your reports 16.22 and 16.23, which are your special education status reports, won't reflect the most accurate enrollment exit codes for your students. This can have an impact on federal reporting for students exiting special education. If, however, this is a local decision, so if you just decide that you want to certify end of year 3 first, you have to be cognizant of the fact, if you certify end of year 4 first, you have to be cognizant of the fact that data submitted and certified in the end of year 3 submission may have caused changes to your end of year 4 reports. So you'd want to review some new revisions on those reports to make sure nothing has changed. And so to save that extra work, we recommend certifying them together. End of year 3 data requirements for students with disabilities. What are we collecting? So from July 1st of 2024 to June 30th of 2025, for children and students with disabilities aged 3 to 21 inclusive, we're collecting incidents involving violation of Ed Code sections 48900 or 48915, even if that incident did not result in a suspension or an expulsion. Additionally, any incidents that resulted in physical or mechanical restraint or seclusion, even if though the incident was not affiliated with a violation of Ed Code sections 48900 or 48915. For end of year 4, from the same time period, July 1st through June 30th, children and students aged 0 to 21 inclusive who are eligible and participating in special education on an IEP, ISP, or IFSP, or students who were evaluated for special education, but were determined to be eligible, but they are not participating, or they were determined to be not eligible. Additionally, students who are exiting the special education program. And finally, post-secondary status data for students with disabilities who exited secondary education in the 2023-4 academic year while eligible and participating on an IEP. Some local special education data system audits. Well, first, does anybody have any questions about this early bit that we talked about with the calendar and some of the expected data and the data that we're collecting for these reports? Right. The local SEDS audits. Before the submission window opens and school ends, well, I think we passed that one. However, you still should be doing these audits to make sure that everything is accurate. You can use your special education data system searches. They may have some vendor created searches that are useful. I know SACE does, and I'm sure that Cyrus and the others do as well, to monitor your data. Or you can create your own as well. But you want to search for things like the least restrictive environment fields, program setting for your students that are 5 years old in TK or higher, and general education participation percentage. Look at the parent involvement codes, the last and next plan review and reevaluation dates, the parental consent dates for students that are pending that Part B initial, and the transition indicators for your students that will be 16 years old as of June 30th of this year. I want to speak a little bit more about those last and next plan review and reevaluation dates. These dates, and I can only speak from my experience in SACE, but those dates, they're a little bit risky to rely on completely. And the reason for that is because they're manually entered or they're maybe manually calculated based on another misentry. So for example, when I worked with the Fresno County SELPA, one of our LEAs had an issue where the case manager had projected a 4-year lapse to the next reevaluation, and they just had not caught that mistake. So of course, they passed the 3-year reevaluation timeline and were late without cause. So it's very important that these next plan review and reevaluation dates, when you rely on those in your special education data system to make sure your meetings are being held within the appropriate timelines, it's critical that those dates are accurate. One practice that we had was asking case managers at the beginning of the year to go through their entire caseload and make sure those projected dates were correct based on the meetings that had been held for the students. So looking through the IEP history and making sure that the next projected date was 3 years from the last reeval, and the next plan review was projected within 1 year from the most recent plan review. I even heard anecdotally of one LEA that was providing some sort of a gift card to case managers that calendared all of their meetings based on these timelines. So however it works in your LEA, whatever practice you find useful, find a way to audit these projected next dates at the beginning of the year so that you don't miss a timeline because it did not inform your notifications correctly. Save and lock all IEPs and amendments. So save and lock in SACE, that would be affirm, but it means basically the same thing. You're just saving the meeting to show that the meeting took place. So when you click the affirm button, you're just clicking save. Hit the save button, that meeting took place, and we can report that meeting record to CalPADS to reflect that we have met our statutory timeline. You want to do this even in the case when the parent has not signed the IEP, right? Because sometimes you don't come to an agreement in the IEP meeting, and you may have to hold subsequent amendment meetings to make adjustments to the plan before everybody finally agrees. You still want to save that initial meeting so that you can have that meet record transaction to post to CalPADS to report that you are following the statutory timelines. I know that in SACE, for example, for Part B initial meetings, you're not able to affirm without parent signature. In that instance, you would need to submit or post a meet record to CalPADS in online maintenance. Basically, you would just go in and add the record manually to show that the meeting had been held. And then once you have that signature and you make that update in SACE and affirm, SACE will then create the plan and the services and the status record for you to then post. So,
Can I chime in here just for one
course.
second?
Of
This slide is so important, folks, because this is one of the primary reasons that many of you have timeline compliance in your annual determination letters, is because your case managers are not saving those records or affirming those records. And you are not submitting up those meet records through online maintenance, as Dominic has just talked about. This is one of the primary reasons this happens. So if you ensure that all of your case managers affirm all IEP and amendments, it will ensure that the correct data are in there for us to pull for compliance purposes.
Thank you, Brandy. That's a great point. And especially because, when it comes to monitoring, your data, we only have the data that you have provided to us, your data posted in CalPads, right? We can't look into SACE and that sort of thing. So this is a vital piece of the puzzle. And as Brandy said, when we traveled to work with LEAs on timeline compliance, this was the number one cause that they found when going through their data of those timelines not being met. Review any students marked as do not report, or especially review transactions that you have marked do not report. Maybe you're going through the reporting process and there is a CalPads issue where validation is triggering incorrectly, and there's no way for you to fix that and post the rest of your records. So you mark that particular transaction as do not report, proceed with the rest of your report, and get everything posted. Don't forget to go back. You have to go back and find that transaction and make sure that it gets posted. So we need the data, the records for reportable transactions, which defined here are any event that is held in the academic year, such as an initial evaluation, a plan review, a reevaluation, an amendment to the plan, or overdue pending meetings as of the end of the year. Make sure when you mark those transactions do not report, and again, I can only speak for my experience in SACE, add a comment, add the CalPads error code that's triggering incorrectly, add the date that you've marked this record do not report, add your name or initials to that comment. Do future you a favor by putting that information there so you don't just see transactions that are marked do not report with no idea why. When helping LEAs, when I was with Fresno County. So often we would be going back to look at these transactions that have been marked do not report in order, we're trying to fix some sort of an issue. And they were marked do not report without any sort of comment or explanation. So it was even more of a difficult mystery to unravel without that extra information. Make sure your students are properly exited from special education as well. Make sure your case managers or any students that are exiting special education have the next necessary exit information populated in your special education data system. The exit date, the exit reason, new eligibility status. You can run a search in your special education data system to identify records that have exit information populated and then determine whether or not that record needs to be exited or if that information can be deleted. When I began with CDE just over a year ago, one of the first tickets I worked on was for a district where a student had exited special education in December of 2023, and the case manager submitted that request to their special education data system administrator, submitted that exit request in August of 2024. So you had a student going through an additional reporting cycle that they should not have been included in, and who knows what else could have come about because of that. So it's important that these requests are sent and processed in a timely manner so that all of your students that are exiting during this academic year are reported accurately. Exiting no-show enrollments with the same date as the enrollment start date for SPED reports. So this is guidance we have been providing since about September of last year. When using exit code N470, the enrollment exit date should be equal to the enrollment start date. Now, CalPads will allow for the exit date to be the day before the start date for these N470 exits, the no-show exits. But CalPADS reports will not acknowledge that enrollment, and students end up being excluded from the reports. So using that exit date equal to the enrollment start date when using the exit code N470, make sure those students are captured in the 16.22 and 16.23 reports accurately. The report descriptions in the documentation do note that students with N470 enrollments will be pulled into the reports as appropriate. But again, if that enrollment exit date is not equal to the enrollment start date, that would actually completely remove the student from pulling into those reports. So please pay close attention to this. If you have used this code previously this year, you can run monitoring report 16.24. That report is going to have your statuses, as well as the enrollment start and exit dates and the exit code. So you can identify students where you used code N470 and take a look at the dates to make sure they are the same. And if they're not, of course, please update that enrollment exit in your student information system. Review your SSID and local ID fields. Your SSIDs, of course, assigned from CalPADS. Local ID is assigned by your student information system. Records must have both of those data elements in order to post to CalPADS. If you submit these records without that overlapping, I got ahead of myself. Make sure that there is an enrollment in the student information system for these types of transactions. A status of 1, eligible and participating. Plan records and service records. All three of those require an overlapping enrollment on those effective start dates. If those records are submitted without an overlapping enrollment in CalPADS, you're going to get the dreaded GER5 error. So again, ensure that there is an enrollment in CalPADS for a status of eligible and participating or plan or service records. Review your transition services, and these are part of State Performance Plan Indicator 13. Every student that is 16 years or older as of June 30th of this year must have a transition plan with all 8 transition questions answered and transition services in the IEP. If there is a situation where the responses have been entered as no and that is not accurate, you need to amend the plan to report the accurate responses. You should, as part of your regular audits in your special education data system, identify these students who are going to need these plans in place by June 30th. And keep in mind, the Plan 390 through 397 E4 validations, those are the validations for the 8 transition indicators, have been updated to use the student's age as of June 30th when checking for these data elements. Previously, the validation used the student's age on the plan effective start date. So, for example, if a student was 15 years old in March and they held their IEP in March, and these validation or these questions were left unanswered, last year that would be fine. But if the student turned 16 in May, now these validations will trigger. And remember, these validations are asking that data be present in those fields. The answer could be no, and that will still bypass this validation. However, if the answers are no, those will weigh against you for State Performance Plan Indicator 13. Indicator 13 expects every response to be yes or not applicable for those students that will be 16 years old on June 30th. So again, this is a slight change, so be sure that you're monitoring this in your special education data system. I know case managers are bolting for the door for summer break right now. And if there needs to be an amendment held to update those plans, make sure that you're getting that done and reported and posted to CalPADS before they leave. Because again, those elements are required for the students that will be 16 on June 30th. Review the data for the students that are placed in non-public, non-sectarian certified schools, your NPS placements. You want to review the data, including the school of attendance, primary residence code, the percent of time in general education. The program setting should be 300 separate school. Also check the service provider and service location codes for these students. Compare the students in your special education data system against what you have in the student information system. I know I've asked at every roadshow if any users have SIS to special education data system integration. And it's not, I would say it's about half, maybe less, but those who do have that integration report it being very useful in keeping everything aligned between the two systems. However, if that is not something that you are using, you need to make sure that you're investigating students that you find in one system but not in the other. If you have a student that has been exited, their enrollment has been exited from your student information system, it may require an exit in your special education data system as well. If they, for example, if they had transferred. If a student has been exited from special education in your special education data system, ensure that they are still not showing up as a student with disabilities in your SIS. And finally, for preschool or private school students, when they exit special education, make sure that the CalPADS enrollment is also exited, because you would not normally enroll preschool or private school students unless they were receiving services on an IEP or ISP. Take a look at those pending meeting types. So for Part B initial evaluations, make sure there's a pending meeting record posted to CalPADS to reflect that. This is how we monitor your child find, parent consent date, and the IEP meeting. So make sure those pending records have the referral date and the referring party, as well as the meeting type that is pending. Once the meetings are held for these students, generate a transaction to report the appropriate outcome. And very important, if while you're going through the assessment process, if the parent revokes consent and no longer wants their student to be assessed, make sure not only to deactivate that student record in your special education data system, but delete that pending record from CalPAD. As I mentioned, that pending record is how we monitor the 60-day timeline for child find. If that pending record remains and you're no longer going through the process of assessing the student, that timeline may elapse. And as I said, all we can see is what you've posted in CalPADS. And if all we see is a pending record and no subsequent meeting record within that timeline, then that student is going to end up in your annual determination letter, or will just be out of compliance on that timeline. So be sure to monitor those pending records and delete that pending meeting record if you're no longer assessing that student. Make sure all incidents for your students with disabilities are documented in your student information system. Work with your CalPADS administrator to make sure all incidents for your students with disabilities are documented. And this includes incidents for students in your NPS placements. Check with your special education administrators for any behavioral emergency reports for violations of Ed Code sections 48900 or 48915. In or out of school suspensions or expulsions, physical or mechanical restraint or seclusion. All of that information needs to be reported in your student information system. And behavioral emergency reports or information that comes from your NPS schools may not go to somebody who knows that they need to be reported in your student information system. It might go to your special education director, who looks at the report, says, okay, and then files it away, and nobody knows about it, right? So make sure not only that you're aware of what needs to be received from your NPS placements with regards to incident reporting, but that administrators know as well, so that that information does not sort of come to one person and never make it to be entered in your student information system. Conduct those post-secondary outcome surveys. So we're surveying students who left secondary education in the previous academic year, so the 2023-24 academic year, while eligible and participating on an IEP. These surveys would go to students who had these completer or exit codes. More information can be found in the CalPADS Flash 203, which is linked in this slide. It's on the box site. That documentation also goes through the hierarchy of responses and how they are assigned and how that translates into your indicator. So again, make sure you're sending out and getting this information back from those students that left in the previous academic year. Okay, I do see some questions, so let's go ahead and address those before moving on to the next section. Rebecca asked, how can we find those who will no longer be assessed in SACE? You would need to probably work with your case managers or maybe site or program administrators to identify those students. They would be pending in SACE. The file status would be, or the record status would be a pending as opposed to eligible. So just take a look at those pending records and see if you have a parent consent date on those records. So you can run a search and pull that parent consent date into the results. And then that will help you identify those students whose timelines are going. And then ideally, whoever is making those exits, as Brittany states as well, you should be part of the process if this is your function, if you're the SACE administrator. As she also states, you can take a look at that new CalPAD 16.25 report and identify those students that may be exceeding that timeline. And then reach out to site administrators or program administrators or case managers to figure out the status of those students. And if they're no longer being assessed, to delete those enrollments, or I'm sorry, to delete those pending meeting records. And it's just part of, it should be part of your local process. The case manager who would know that the parent no longer wants to have their child assessed should be communicating that to the SACE administrator, whatever channels that ends up being through at your LEA. In the Fresno County SELPA, we would request that that information or those changes be requested in the system. Some LEAs may prefer just sending an email, but whatever works for you. Oh, and Brandy just answered the last one. Thank you, Brandy. So moving on, auditing data in your local special education data system after school ends. Make sure you are exiting graduates and completers who are not returning. Work with your student information system administrator to identify those students that are high school graduates, especially those who graduate with a standard diploma. Make sure those students and other completers who are not returning next year are exited from your special education data system. Students who graduate with a standard high school diploma are no longer eligible for special education. So you would need to report up a status that reflects that. A status of 4, not eligible, with a non-participation reason code of 30, no longer eligible. What's really important is the status effective start date for that record. The status effective start date must be the day after the enrollment exit date. So if your graduating seniors who earned a diploma are exiting on May 30th, make sure that status effective start date is the day after, May 31st, even if it's a Saturday. We're not validating that you're exiting students outside of business hours. It's not part of the consideration. But it's critical that status is effective the day after, because if their status of not eligible is reported as effective the same day as the last day of their enrollment, it will no longer count as a student with disabilities for end of year reporting. So it's very, very important that the status effective start date for your students that are graduating with a standard high school diploma, and only those students, make sure that status is effective the day after the enrollment exit. This is a list of student information system enrollment exit codes that may also lead to special education exits. Whether it is transferring to another state, transferring to private school, transferring to outside of the United States. So take a look at these exit codes when you're reviewing your 16.22, 16.23 reports to ensure that students who have exited with these codes make sure an exit is processed in your special education data system as well, if necessary.
Dominic, can I
Yes.
can I chime in about that, the prior slide? Bring you
Yes.
back to the prior slide. Okay,
Sure.
so Dominic told you why we're recommending that you do, but it's essentially because when they're processing the data for cohort, they're looking at the student status as of the exit date. And your special ed vendors are sending up statuses of not eligible on the exit date. And so what's happening is you're not getting credit for your special education graduates in cohort. So what we will be doing in the data evaluation and analysis office, we are going to be doing sort of a data quality analysis in June and sending the results of that analysis to your SELPAs. One of the things that we're going to look at is this: how many of you students that with a standard high school diploma exit in CalPADS have a status of not eligible on that exit date. So we're going to be telling you which ones are affected, and we're going to kind of come up with some strategies to assist you guys in amending that, because right now our technical folks are not willing to adjust that logic. So just be aware.
Thank you, Brandy. Appreciate the extra context for sure. Catherine, I see, has a question. We had grads throughout this school year. Do we need to go and change their exit date to the day after their graduation date? If they graduated with a standard diploma and the enrollment exit date and the status effective start date are equal, then yes, you should go and adjust those status effective start dates to be one day after that enrollment exit. Your post-secondary follow-up results. So those students that left secondary education in the previous academic year while eligible and participating on an IEP, make sure that those students have been surveyed and those outcomes have been recorded and posted to CalPADS. Even for students that refuse to answer, students that you're not able to get a hold of, make sure you record those results as well. Again, all of this data informs State Performance Plan Indicator 14, which is your post-secondary outcomes. So make sure you're surveying those students and recording all of the results. Identify your students that are completing work-based learning programs. You can work with your case managers to identify students that have completed at least 100 hours of work experience in any grades 9 through 12. And that could be through Workability or Department of Rehabilitation Student Services. Additionally, work with your CalPADS administrator to identify courses for students with disabilities that focus on classroom-based work exploration, such as choosing a career path or resume building or something along those lines, however that is classified in those courses. And make sure that data gets into your student information system for that work-based learning reporting. Any questions about that round of special education data system audits that you can perform once the school year has ended and you're working through processing exits and that sort of thing? Okay. Data submission and error resolution. Some updated special education data discrepancies and certification data discrepancies for this end of year. I'm not going to go through all of these, but for particular notice, I would like you to pay attention to SANR 0717 and SANR 0661. Neither of those errors are special education data specific. So for example, if you look at Plan 673, that's talking about plan records and status records. But those two SCNR 717 and 661, those trigger based on information reported from your student information system. It's important to be aware of these because while they are not special education data specific validations, they will prevent certification for end of year 4. So just bear in mind that there are end of year 4 validations that may not be special education data specific. Additionally, we have some new data discrepancies for this end of year. And thankfully, in this virtual context, I can't see all of your angry expressions at this whole list of new data discrepancies, but worry not. You may notice that they are all warnings. In the level, every validation is a warning. So these will not prevent you from certifying end of year 3 or 4. I think they're all end of year 4. However, they do represent anomalous data. You notice that most of them are service codes, many are plan codes as well. They represent anomalies in the data that you've posted to CalPADS. For example, you may have a high school student, but you're reporting that that student is receiving a service that is meant for students age 0 to 5. That's anomalous data. That's something that should be corrected. It's not accurate. So again, while these warnings will not prevent you from certifying, we do encourage you to pay special attention to them when you can and correct them, because this anomalous data could carry forward if unchecked. And you want to make sure that the data in CalPADS closely matches or is identical to what is in your special education data system, and that it makes sense. Submit and post your transactions after you perform the audits in your special education data system. Make sure all of the transactions are submitted and posted to CalPADS, with emphasis on posted. I try to say posted whenever I talk about reporting data or submitting data, because the posting is the most important part. Otherwise, it's akin to doing your homework but not turning it in. You know what I mean? Make sure that that record is posted in CalPADS. Even if your special education data system indicates that the record is CalPADS accepted or is posted to CalPADS, you still need to confirm that that record does exist in CalPADS. There are instances where your special education data system and CalPADS would not match. And some of that can have to do with incomplete reporting. So there are occasions where a transaction in SACE, for example, will show accepted by CalPADS, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has been posted to CalPADS. There is no data that comes back in the reporting process from CalPADS to tell your special education data system that a record for sure exists and was posted there. That functionality just does not exist. So if you're looking at your transactions in SACE and you're seeing, meet accepted, plan accepted, service accepted, that does not guarantee that that exists in CalPADS. Additionally, there were situations that could create completely blank transactions. This has been remedied, but in the previous year, during the affirm process, it would have been possible for a case manager to select that they were affirming a non-SACE IEP. They're adopting the plan. So when that is selected, that would tell SACE that it's just a plan adoption, so don't create a meeting record and don't create a status record. They could also indicate at the same time that the meeting was not, they did not have parent signature. The meeting was unsigned. That selection tells SACE, okay, the parent has not agreed to the plan, so don't create a plan and don't create services. So when both of those are checked, you would have a transaction with no meet record, no status record, no plan record, and no service record. However, if that transaction were to go through the reporting process, it would show, accepted by CalPADS on this date and all 4 meeting types accepted. Thankfully, as I said, that possibility has been limited now. The ability to adopt non-SACE or out-of-state IEPs has been moved to the district level administrator permissions as opposed to provider permissions. So case managers can no longer make that indication. However, when you are looking at your timeline compliance, it could be the case that a triennial was not reported last year accurately due to some sort of empty data like this. And you would be pulling out your hair trying to figure it out if you were not aware that there is a possibility that a transaction would be completely blank. SACE has also updated the way that they display this information for the transactions. You can click on the pencil icon to edit any particular transaction. And at the top of that page, it's going to show you which record types are in the transaction. So say, meet, yes, status, no, plan, yes, services, yes. So you know that the meet, the plan, and the service records are all part of that transaction. However, you do have to edit each transaction individually to make that determination. It's not shown in any sort of one page for all of your transaction. Wake up May 6th, error free. I'm about a month late. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully, some of you were able to achieve this anyway. I did ask this when I was out on the road, and there were a few hands up in every session, and that's very encouraging. I'm very happy for the people that were able to take advantage of the data discrepancies function in CalPads to get ahead of the reporting window and start without any errors. Like, that's just a fantastic way to start the reporting window. You can use your data discrepancies to identify those errors, certification data discrepancies ahead of time. So you can navigate to that in CalPads, and you can find all of your end of year data discrepancies that are fatal. You can find information on resolving each of these errors in the CalPads documentation in the CalPads user manual. But additionally, if you notice in the summary grid where it lists all of the errors, error codes, and how many of that error are triggering, if you click on the error code, it will take you to the CalPads user manual page for that particular error, which is extremely useful. That page is going to show you which fields are being validated for the error, as well as common ways to correct the discrepancies. So you don't have to, open another window and try to search for the error. It's just you click and you have that information right there to go through and correct those errors. Any questions about data submission and error correction? We can jump into the high frequency data discrepancies. As I mentioned earlier, there are some data discrepancies that trigger at a much larger scale than others. I look at this on a weekly basis. Kyron has usually generated the extract, so I just download the work that he's already done. And I look to see which errors are triggering most frequently. And it's usually the same 3 or 4 error codes, so we'll discuss those. Number one, almost always, is SENR 606E4, missing plan record for an enrolled, eligible, and participating student with disabilities. This is most often occurs when a student transfers into your district, and in CalPads, that student is eligible and participating with a plan from another district. When a student transfers into your LEA, you need to adopt the plan record and post that to CalPads to acknowledge or to show that you are aware that this is a student with disabilities and you are providing services according to their plan. You can find the students that have transferred into your district and may be triggering this error by using CalPads Monitoring Report 16.21, as well as the data discrepancy user interface that we just showed. You can be proactive and identify those students on a weekly basis. We recommend at least a weekly basis. So if you work with your CalPads administrator and find out that they send up their enrollments every Friday, maybe you have a calendar reminder that every Monday you generate report 1621 to identify those students that have transferred in. And then you know that you need to request the record for your special education data system and adopt that plan and post that adopted plan to CalPads to avoid that SENR 606E4. Again, we recommend running this report at least weekly to stay on top of those students that are coming in, not only to make sure you're adopting that plan record, but to take a look at their timelines. If a student transfers into your LEA with an overdue timeline, that timeline is now your timeline, and you can use report 1621 to solve or to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, because you're going to be able to identify both of those issues with this single report. Meet 624E4, missing special education status record. So we talked earlier about making sure that your IEP meetings are, saved, finalized, affirmed as soon as possible so you can report that the meeting took place. However, we do know that there are those exceptions for Part B initials in SACE. And so if you have added a meeting record to CalPADS to reflect that meeting was held, CalPADS is going to expect a status as well. You've had the meeting. What's the status? What's the outcome? So when you have posted that meet record in CalPADS, but you, of course, have not been able to affirm, you're still working to get parent signature, you need to make sure you're adding a status record as well. You want to add a status record reflecting the outcome of the meeting while you're working to get that parent signature. So, for example, if the student was found eligible and you're still working through the plan and the parent, you haven't been able to submit that status and the meeting from your special education data system, you can add a status of eligible not participating with the non-participation reason code of 12, no plan, future plan expected. And that tells CalPADS that for this meeting that was held, there's not yet a plan, but the student is eligible. If a student is found ineligible, submit up that status of 4 not eligible with the non-participation of 21 not eligible. And then once the parent signature is obtained and final agreement to the plan or to the outcome of the meeting has been accepted, update that status if necessary. So for that student that is eligible and not participating, once the plan is agreed to, when you affirm that in SACE, it's going to create that plan and service record, as well as that status of eligible and participating, that you then need to ensure that you are posting to CalPADS to reflect that final outcome and to avoid Meet 624. Plan 390 through Plan 397, missing transition indicators. So for those students that will be 16 years old, as of June 30th, these validations ensure that those data elements are not blank. Remember earlier I said there could be answers of no in these fields that will resolve these errors. However, if the answer is no, and that is what is reported, that will not look or will not count favorably in the state performance plan indicator 13. So if those are answered no, just to bypass the validation, just be cognizant of the fact that may not look great on your state performance plan. Any questions about the most frequently triggering data discrepancies? Zoom in a little bit. So this is the section, and according to the manual, the presence of the following information in the student's file and a clear link of this information to those post-secondary goals meets the requirements. So state mandated test scores, semester grades, progress notes, college entrance exams, informal interviews with the students. There are a bunch of different things that would satisfy the requirements for indicating yes on this particular transition question. If the indicator is marked no, unfortunately, I don't know exactly what that would end up being as results to your state performance plan indicator outcomes from the top of my head.
This is a compliance item, which means IDEA mandates that students ages 16 and above must have a transition plan in place. So it's a compliance. Either you meet it or you don't.
Right. They expect yeses for everything.
Correct. So if you're out of compliance, it could potentially end up in a finding for your district.
And Tanya, if you don't have this documentation, if you want to send an email to speddatasupport@cde.ca.gov, we can make sure that you have it. Reviewing our end of year reports. So once you have resolved all your data discrepancies, made sure all of your data is posted, of course, and certification data discrepancies, only then should you begin reviewing the reports. If you start to look at your reports before you have finalized your data, things could change, and you may have been wasting some time. What do we use this end of year data for? It's used to inform federal state performance plan and local annual performance report indicators, numbers 1, 2, 4, 8, 11, 12, 13, and 14. We'll go through those in a few moments. I don't expect everybody to have those memorized. The annual determinations for the 2025-26 monitoring year, the California School Dashboard, and proportionate share calculation. Reporting LEA versus District of Special Education accountability. The reporting LEA is where the student is enrolled, and they're responsible for CalPADS data collection and reporting. The District of Special Education Accountability, the DSEA, is where the results of State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report indicators are assigned. Annual determinations are assigned. The California School Dashboard points back to the DSEA, as well as funding. So you may be accountable for students that are being reported and having data certified by other districts. So you need to be aware of who these students are and be informed. How do you identify and verify this information? There are two extracts in CalPADS under DSEA extract. There's the accountability extract and the informational extract. The accountability extract reports students reported by other LEAs where the requesting LEA, as in the LEA running the report, is assigned as the DSEA. It also reports students that you are reporting that you have enrolled where a different DSEA is assigned. This report, or this extract, is limited in grade level and enrollment status, and it does not include charter schools. The informational extract reports students that are not enrolled in your LEA, but your LEA has been assigned as the District of Special Education Accountability, populated in the plan record by another LEA. This extract includes all grade levels and enrollment statuses and does include charter schools. You can find the definition for District of Special Education Accountability at this link to the CalPADS documentation, and there's an outline of the extracts in the link to the CalPADS user manual as well. Again, you can find the extracts in the extracts menu on the left-hand side of CalPADS in the blue menu. Click on extracts, and on the far right, under DSEA extracts, you can find the accountability and the informational extracts. Now, if you were to generate those extracts and download the file and open it up, it would likely open up in Notepad or some other text editor, and it would be a bunch of numbers and commas, and not really useful unless you're a robot, in which case, perfect. But for those of us humans who work in this system, we fortunately have a couple of templates available for these extracts. Both templates are available at the link shown, and they're available in the meeting materials CDE box site as well for your convenience. So the way this works is you request and download your extract file, and then you open up your template, and there's a huge button at the top, Import DSEA Extract File. You click on that button, point to the extract that you downloaded, and it imports the extract into this template, assigning the numbers to the appropriate columns so that it is readable and usable. So an outstanding resource for these extracts, and they are available at the links and in your meeting materials as well. You want to review the extracts. You want to make sure that you are sending accountability to the correct LEA. So if there's a student that you're reporting, but the DSEA is different than your LEA, make sure that is accurate. If it's not accurate, you would need to modify the plan record to identify the correct LEA. You also, and this is probably more critical, when you are receiving accountability, when you have been assigned as the DSEA by another LEA, make sure that is accurate. If not, you can't fix it. You would need to contact the reporting LEA and ask that they make the correction on their plan file. And the reason that this is really important is, as we just discussed, DSEA is where State Performance Plan and Annual Performance Report indicators are assigned, as well as disproportionality. So if a student in another LEA has been assigned to your district as the accountable district, and they've suspended that student 30 times, that's going to come back on you, right? So it's really important to make sure you're aware of students that you are accountable for, but you are not responsible for reporting their data. And again, if this assignment is incorrect, you can't fix it. You need to reach out to the other LEA and ensure that they make that change on the plan record. This is kind of what I just said. I do this every time. Make sure that your LEA is accountable for all the students that appear on the extract, and contact the reporting LEA to make adjustments if it is not. Some minor report changes for the 2024-25 academic year. Report 16.12, the LEA and SELPA versions, the name total unduplicated count will be updated to total unduplicated by plan count to clarify that the column is unduplicated by plan. Report 16.14 will be updated to include enrollment information. So at the end of the 16.14 report, you're going to see columns for enrollment start date, enrollment status, enrollment exit date, enrollment exit reason, and completer status. It's all fantastic information. Now you have sort of a one-stop to see all of that information for your students in 1614. We've also renamed the degree of support 1 column to just degree of support because we only collect one data element for degree of support. And additionally, we have the new monitoring report, 16.25, initial Part B evaluation 60-day timeline monitoring. I feel like I should have edited the slide to indicate that it has been released and is not going to be released, but I've missed a few of those as it is. I can't fix them all. I should. Anyhow, what should you be looking for in your reports? As we're going through these reports, think about or discuss your local strategies for reviewing these reports. Who should be involved in reviewing what reports? How do you know what you should be looking for when you review the reports? Are there any glaring red flags that you can spot right away and save yourself the time of going through all of it when you just know at a glance that something's not right? And then how do you determine the final approver? How do you know whose signature or whose approval you want to get before LEA or SELPA approving your data? The end of year 4 certification reports. We use data from certified end of year 4 reports to inform indicator 13, the transition goals in the IEP. Those are those 8 transition questions. We also use this data for indicator 14, those post-secondary surveys for those students that left secondary education in the previous academic year while eligible and participating on an IEP. We also use ODS data for the federal indicators. ODS means operational data store. Another way to think of it is the live database. So when you post new records to CalPADS, the live database, the ODS, updates and reflects the most current data. We use ODS data that is effective as of the amendment window closing, so August 8th in this academic year, for indicator 8, which is the parent involvement code. That is the parent indicating whether or not they felt that they were a part of the process of developing this plan. That's a question that has to be asked to the parent. It can't just be, oh, the parent showed up, so they participated, I'm going to check this. But that data is collected from the ODS after the window. Also, indicator 11, which is your child find, the time frame between evaluation and identification. That's 60-day timeline. And indicator 12, the Part C to B transition for your students that are in an infant program receiving services on an IFSP, whether they had the IEP in place by their 3rd birthday. End of year 4 report 16.12 for your students with disabilities planned by primary disability. When reviewing this report, make sure that all students with disabilities enrolled and eligible and participating throughout the academic year are reflected. On June 30th, run a report in your special education data system that you can compare to report 16.12 and 16.14. I know in Cyrus, they have an end of year report that you can generate. And in SACE, they have a student report that you can generate. And SACE will actually automatically generate one of these for you on June 30th. We'll do it on Census Day as well, because you need that snapshot of what your data looked like at the end of the year. For this report, you want to review those counts by plan type. If you do not serve students on IFSPs, if you do not have an infant program in your LEA, you should not see any counts for IFSPs. Same goes for ISPs. If you do not serve students in a private school located within your district boundaries, you should not have any counts under ISP. Take a look at the counts by primary disability. Are those counts consistent with what is in your special education data system? How do these counts compare with prior years? You can generate 16.12 for last end of year and take a look. And if there are any large swings, either increases or decreases, that may be something worth investigating. Report 16.14 is the profile list that informs Report 16.12, the aggregate report. For this, you can download it as a CSV from CalPADS. And we recommend downloading it as a CSV because if you download it in Excel format, it's going to look like you see here with the green boxes and everything formatted nicely. But that formatting requires merging cells and moving things around, and it makes the data impossible to manipulate. If you need to sort or count or sum up or aggregate or however, you're not going to be able to do that effectively in that Excel format. The CSV format looks like a plain old boring data spreadsheet. Perfect. It's exactly what we need. You can filter the report to look for those students that are going to be 16 and find those students that have blanks or no's in the transition indicators and make sure that is accurate. Compare the school of attendance and program setting. Do they not match? For example, do you have a student enrolled in your regular elementary school, but you're reporting a separate school as their program setting? That's worth looking into. You also want to check out the primary residence code, make sure that is accurate, especially for those students in residential placements. As you're looking at this report, take a look at the program setting and gen ed participation. Does it make sense? For example, on this page, there's a student reported in regular classroom public day school participating 1% of the time. That might not be correct. Report 16.23, your special education status and non-participation status list. Again, you want to download this as a CSV, and you can use appropriate students with disability status and non-participation reason for student exit reason and completion statuses. You can use that tool to find anomalies in this report. What that tool does, and it's an Excel document that's available in your meeting materials, for every enrollment exit and completer status, it's going to tell you what the expected students with disability status record should look like. So you can use that and compare the data, look at the data that you see on 1623, and make sure there are no anomalies between, look for students, for example, with E230 100 as their enrollment exit and completer status. That indicates a student graduated with standard high school diploma. If you see their status is still eligible and participating, that will tell you that, you have yet to exit that student. So just make sure when you're reviewing this report and using that tool that all of those enrollment exits and completer statuses align with the reported students with disability statuses. Stati. 17.4, post-secondary survey outcome student list. These are those students that exited secondary education in the prior academic year while eligible and participating on an IEP. This is the report of the survey results. You can generate CalPADS report 8.1a, which are the student exits, to find the students who exited last year with those specific completer statuses and exit codes. Make sure that's consistent with what is in your special education data system. I know SACE, for example, has a search. I believe it's called, CalPADS Post-Secondary 2025. I'm not sure, apologies. But anyway, it's a generated search in SACE, and you run that, and it's going to show all the students that exited in the previous academic year. And in SACE, it has a direct link to what is called the CalPADS Post-Secondary page. And that is going to be where you would enter the survey results for your students. And then when you save that data, when you save that page, SACE will add that into a report in an overnight process. And then when all is said and done, you would report that just as you would any of your normal reports, for your transactions. Judy notes it's called Post-Secondary EOI 2025. Thank you, Judy, for that information. Make sure the post-secondary statuses have been reported for all of those students, including that not able to contact or refuse to answer. Additionally, pay attention to any of these students that may have re-enrolled in this academic year for any reason. Maybe they came back for transition services after having graduated with an alternative pathway diploma. If that's the case, if they have re-enrolled, they should not have been surveyed. You would want to delete that entry. The ODS reports that we spoke about briefly earlier. First, report 16.26. This report is not available yet. It is coming. A third birthday timeline report for indicator 12. This will be for those students that are receiving services on an ISP or IFSP, I apologize, IFSP as infants, and whether or not they have met that third birthday timeline for having that IEP in place on their third birthday, or students where that third birthday is coming up. So once we have worked through all of the complications in this report, we're excited to launch it, and you will definitely be notified. Report 16.25, initial Part B evaluations 60-day timeline student list. This is a monitoring and accountability report available at the LEA level. There is not a SELPA version of this report at this time, but you can use this report to monitor your initial Part B 60-day timelines. It's going to show you currently pending evaluations, the evaluations that have been held, and the compliance status of those evaluations, and as well if any delay codes have been reported for those timelines. At the bottom, there is a link to the CalPADS user manual page on report 16.25 that helps you understand what records qualify to get pulled into the report and where the data in the report is pulled from, whether that's the plan record, the meeting record, the student information record, all of that information available in the user manual. Any questions about the end of year 4 reports, whether certification reports or those ODS reports? Okay, moving into end of year 3, incident data for students with disabilities, certification reports. Certified end of year 3 data is used for, or sorry, I should say end of year 3 data is used for the California School Dashboard, DataQuest, public reporting of restraint and seclusion, federal IDEA reporting, and state performance plan annual performance report, indicators 4A and 4B. So certified end of year 3 data is used for indicator 1, which are your graduates, you students with disabilities that graduated with a standard high school diploma. It is also used for indicator 2, students who dropped out, as well as indicator 4A, suspension and expulsion overall, and indicator 4B, suspension and expulsion by race ethnicity. Additionally, indicator 9, disproportionality for discipline overall, and indicator 10, disproportionality for discipline by disability. Some of these reports may not be available to every special education data system administrator. They're based on permissions and roles in CalPADS. So if you find a report that we discuss here that you do not have access to, reach out to your CalPADS administrator and ask for either access to the report or ask them to generate it on your behalf. Report 1.23, completers and graduates. You want to check this report for your students with disabilities and take a look at the exit reason and completer status. Make sure that your graduates are identified correctly, because students that graduate during the year count towards that indicator 1, regardless of the cohort year. Report 8.1, the student profile list. You can use this to identify any students with disabilities that may have been indicated as dropouts. And if that's the case, make sure those are accurate. You can see there's a column that identifies students with disabilities, and then the column indicating whether or not they are a dropout. What are you certifying in end of year 3 for your students with disabilities? So from July 1st to June 30th of the academic year, those incidents involving violations of Ed Code sections 48900 or 48915, or incidents resulting in the use of mechanical or physical restraint or seclusion, even if they were not a result of Ed Code sections 48900 or 48915. You can refer to Ed Code section 49005.1 for specific definitions of restraint and seclusion, and CalPADS /159 for a summary of the discipline file structure. Incidents for all students are tracked in the student information system, but there are specific data elements that are tracked for students with disabilities, such as the instructional support indicator, which is required to be populated when a student is suspended or expelled. The removal to interim alternative setting reason code. It's a very rare occurrence. It's a 45-day placement. I'll talk a bit more about that in an upcoming slide. And also the incident result authority code. Additionally, remember, any incidents for your students with disabilities that are in NPS placements must also be reported. So that's why communication is super important when it comes to this, because special education staff are going to be the folks who know whether or not the student received that instructional support during a suspension or expulsion. They're going to know who authorized the disciplinary action. They're going to know whether or not the student was actually on that 45-day interim placement. And they will also have information on your NPS students that had incidents that need to be reporting. There should be regular communication between your special education staff and student information system staff regarding all of these data elements. End of year 3 report 7.16, incident restraint, seclusion, and removals. First, you want to take a look at the percent of students with disabilities with those removals. You can take the total students removed divided by your total student count from report 16.12. Take a look at those students there where it is indicated they were moved to an interim alternative setting. That is a very, very rare occurrence. An interim alternative setting, a removal to interim alternative setting is a 45-day placement, and it's usually the result of a very severe violation of Ed Code involving violence, that sort of a thing. They're extremely, extremely rare. So if you see any indications of a removal to interim alternative setting, investigate it. Also check for incidents of restraint or seclusion, and make sure that if there were any behavioral emergency reports, that they are represented as well. Report 7.18, the incident removals list. This is going to be the disaggregated list report that informs report 7.16. So for every student and every incident and every outcome, there is going to be a row in this report. So again, use this to verify that incidents were reported for your NPS students. A filter for Student Offense Code 511, disruption defiance. Make sure that no students with disabilities were suspended, expelled solely for disruption defiance. You cannot do that. If you do see that on the report, double check that with administration. Was the student on an IEP on the incident date? If a student had an incident and then was found eligible for special education, a week later, or were they exited from special education and then had an incident a week later, make sure that that is correct. Make sure that those students who were not eligible and participating on an IEP were actually on an IEP when the incident took place. Make sure the duration days for the suspension and expulsion are correct, and make sure the offense codes are correct. Asks, interim alternative setting. Is it okay to leave those blank, or should we be marking those blank spots with 3s, no removal, as the best practice? I would say that's definitely a local decision. However, you would normally do that where there was nothing to indicate. Would you indicate no response, or would you normally leave it blank? So I would just try to stay consistent with whatever your normal practices are. If you indicate 3, no removal, the benefit to that is it tells you that you've already asked that question, right? If you leave it blank, then it's unknown whether or not that removal question was answered or whether there was a removal or not. So I tend to hedge on the side of too much information when it comes to this sort of thing, but just whatever. And Alex chiming in, it is required to be populated for students with disabilities. So thank you, Alex, for the rescue there. Revising my answer, yes, you should answer 3 for no removal. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Yadira. And Lily, best practice for expulsion dates on SIS or incident result, remainder of the school year. So yeah, that's kind of a tricky one. It really depends on the number of remaining days and what actually happens with the student afterward. Your LEA should have policies and procedures in place on how you approach that. As far as the best practice as recommended by CalPADS, if anybody wants to chime in on that, I would be happy to allow any of you to come on the microphone. I'm not saying you have to, Alex, but I'm going to give you that permission.
Thanks. I was going to say there's an FAQ. I'm trying to find it and I'll post it on here.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Moving on to report 7.12, incident results student list. So is a report that CalPADS administrators may be reluctant to provide because it does include general education students. And so CalPADS administrators are protective of their data, and I love that. I understand completely. However, for this information, there is a legitimate business need for special education administrators to have access to this information. And it's because the calculations for disproportionality are comparing the students with disabilities population against the general education population. And so in order to identify potential disproportionality, they need to be able to take a look at the totality of the incident result reports and figure out where they are in relation to that sort of cutoff or the red line. And Alex just dropped the FAQ on Lily's question. So thank you so much, Alex. You can download this in a CSV and use Excel or Sheets to add up the total suspension or expulsion days and identify those that were expelled more than 10 days. And of course, identify your students with disabilities, make sure that is reporting accurately. The purpose of restraint and seclusion data collection, or why are we collecting this? Beginning in 2019-2020, we started collecting this in order to fulfill our statutory requirements of Ed Code section 49005.1 on the use of restraint and seclusion for gen ed and special education students. Additionally, as a result of a settlement, the court has mandated that the Special Education Division use certified restraint and seclusion data as an additional data point when making annual monitoring determinations. And so the information here is what the court has assigned as a result of this settlement. So it's not something that we have decided is the acceptable ratio or anything like that. This is a directive from the courts. So LEAs that report more than 2 restraint or seclusions per pupil, a 2-to-1 ratio, will be asked to perform student record reviews. Additionally, LEAs that report 0 incidents of restraint or seclusion and have more than 100 students with disabilities, or report 0 incidents of restraint and seclusion and have more than 100 students enrolled at NPS schools, or those that fail to certify the end of year 3 submission will be flagged for questionable data quality and will have to complete additional monitoring activities associated with data quality. Now, as we've held these roadshows, it's been asked, well, my district has a policy. We don't use restraint and seclusion at all. Are we going to be flagged even though reporting 0 incidents of restraint and seclusion is accurate? What I will say is, yes, you will be flagged. Even if you have that policy, it won't change the monitoring determination. However, you do want to work with your focus monitoring and technical assistance consultant with this when it comes to those additional activities, and just work with your consultants on that process. Common issues leading to underreporting restraint and seclusion for students with disabilities. Special education staff unaware that behavioral emergency reports must be documented in the student information system. Additionally, master contracts between LEAs and the NPS schools where you're placing your students don't clearly outline the state reporting requirements. Also, key disciplinary staff within the district may not have been involved in a review of the data that is being sent to CDE. So these are some of the more common issues that lead to underreporting. You can find restraint and seclusion data for your LEA at the restraint and seclusion website here. You can navigate to this page and download the files for your LEA. Any questions on end of year 3, whether that is the restraint and seclusion information, discipline information, that sort of thing? Okay, moving on. End of year 1, work-based learning. You can review report 18.1, the work-based learning count, and verify the counts in the transition work-based experience and transition classroom-based work exploration. Are the students who have completed those 100 hours of work experience with workability or department rehabilitation represented in the transition work-based experience column? Students that have completed 4 semesters of classroom-based work exploration that we talked about a bit earlier, are those students represented in the transition classroom-based work exploration column? You can also download the list report 18.2, which is going to be all of the students that inform this aggregated report, and filter for those learning work-based learning types 60 and 65 to make sure that all of the students who should be reporting for work-based learning are reporting accurately. Any questions on work-based learning? There usually aren't, thankfully, because I am not a work-based learning expert. Utilizing report 16.21, late plan reviews and reevaluations. Using 16.21 to address timeline compliance in the annual determination letter. So to refresh, for the annual determination letter, data were pulled from the CalPADS ODS on January 6th, and we pulled students that were enrolled, eligible, and participating on October 2nd, on Census Day, whose plan review or reevaluations were overdue on October 2nd. We looked also at the status of those timelines on December 13th, which was the initial LEA certification deadline for Fall 1. And so those students that were overdue on Census Day and were still overdue as of that initial LEA certification day were those students that were counted on your annual determination letter. We have a training report or a training video available now. Thank you to Marshall and Matt for getting the video posted on the CSIS YouTube page. You can click on the link in the slide, and it's a brief 5-minute video, and it talks about how to use monitoring report 16.21 and Excel or Google Sheets to identify those students that were on your ADL and to find out what the status of their timelines is currently. Now, you may, or I should say, does anybody or does everybody know why when we send out the ADL, we just send you counts of the number of students that may be out of compliance, as opposed to just sending you a list of students? And it's not because we want to make your lives difficult. If you know, please go ahead and drop that in the chat. Give it a moment. Yes, findings. If I were to say this SSID is overdue on their timeline, that would be issuing a finding of noncompliance. And issuing a finding, there comes a lot of extra work involved with that. So we want to give you a chance to correct your timelines before we issue findings. So the ADL for timeline compliance purposes can be considered pre-findings. You have this many students that appear to be overdue on their timelines. You should really take a look at this data, and here's how we pulled it. That way you have some time to take a look at those timelines and hold those meetings or add delay codes or whatever it takes to bring those timelines back into compliance. How do you find the students that were on the ADL and their current status? Again, you're looking for students that were enrolled, eligible, and participating on census day, who were overdue on census day, and who are still enrolled and still overdue. And I got the slides out of order. That's what I get for making edits to the slideshow at 3 minutes before 1. This slide is a description of the steps that are involved in using 16.21 to identify those students, downloading the reports, using Excel or Sheets to filter. This is all covered in that video. So again, you can use this video to guide you to identifying those students on the CSIS YouTube training channel. Potential causes for late meetings in CalPADS. So when we sent out the annual determination letter, we were asked to reach out to LEAs that had more than 100 students with timeline noncompliance for plan reviews or reevaluations. And so we held sort of workshops with those districts where we worked, myself and Brandy and sometimes the whole team, we would go and meet with several LEAs and talk about what potential causes for reporting non-compliant timelines might be, whether it's missing data or however. And we held 5 of those. I think there were about 35 LEAs all told. And afterwards, we came up with the list of the most common reasons for these timelines to be overdue. So I want to share those with you. Number 1, case managers still reluctant to save, affirm, finalize meetings once they've been initiated if the IEP team has not come to a consensus or if the parent has not signed, right? Brandy mentioned earlier that this is the number 1 reason why students were being found non-compliant. So we recommend creating local policies requiring finalizing, saving, or affirming within 7 days, even without parent signature, in order to generate that meet record to submit to CalPADS. We're also asking SELPAs and LEAs provide training to site administrators to help them better understand why affirming, finalizing, saving without parent signature is a critical component of timeline compliance. Another reason, case managers not providing adequate notice for annual plan review and triennial reevaluation meetings. We heard anecdotally that a case manager would send out a meeting notice, a meeting invitation for a meeting they intended to hold 2 days later. And if the parent couldn't make the meeting, well, now you have potentially missed your timeline, and it would be late without cause, which is non-compliant. There's no valid reason for it. So we recommend that LEAs create a local policy where parents are notified of scheduled meetings with at least 2 weeks of advance notice. That way, especially if that timeline is elapsing, on the day that you intend to hold the meeting, that way there is ample time in between to make adjustments and find a time when the meeting can be held that works for all parties. Meeting records missing from CalPADS because the LEA was not sending up transactions on a regular basis. It's always been recommended that special education data be reported to CalPADS at least weekly. That's not always necessary for every LEA. I worked with some LEAs where there were 8 students with disabilities. So it doesn't necessarily make sense that they are submitting data up on a weekly basis if they only have 8 students. That said, it's a good idea to have a regular practice that works for your LEA that keeps your data up to date as closely as possible and keeps the data in CalPADS matching as closely as possible to what is in your special education data system. So again, we recommend at least once a week, but whatever works for your LEA, you can of course make that decision. Students transferring into districts with overdue plan reviews or reevaluations were identified as non-compliant. Remember, once the student transfers into your district, their timeline is now your responsibility. So as I mentioned earlier, you can use monitoring report 16.21 to identify those students that are transferring in. And you can also use that same report to figure out what their timeline looks like. Did they transfer in and they still haven't had their plan review held and it's now overdue? If that's the case, send up a pending meeting record with that delay code transfer. That will bring that record in, or that timeline, into compliance. And I also want to make a distinction really quickly about overdue versus late. If a meeting is held after the timeline has expired, that meeting is late. If a meeting has not yet been held and the timeline has expired, that meeting is overdue. And I know late and overdue can essentially mean the same thing in general everyday conversation, but for the purposes of timelines and the purposes of your EDL, it's important that that distinction is made. Because if a student transfers into your LEA and their last plan review was held late, that is not your responsibility. However, if they do transfer in with a timeline that is now overdue, that timeline has become your responsibility. And so you want to make sure that you're submitting up that pending meet record with the delay code to explain that. For indicator 13, many students were missing transition goals in their IEPs, even though the goals may have been populated in the special education data system. And this resulted in instances of timeline noncompliance, no transition plan in place by age 16. So as we discussed earlier, run searches or reports in your special education data system to identify those students that will be 16 and make sure those questions are answered. And additionally, as Brandy noted, it is a compliance issue. The federal government expects that all of those are answered in the affirmative or not applicable. And so you want to search your 16.14 report for your students that are 16 or going to be 16 as of June 30th, and make sure that all of that data is populated, ideally with a yes. Students transferring into districts and the previous district did not report meetings that had occurred, which resulted in timeline noncompliance. This happens frequently. We hear about this a lot. And it's one of the benefits of the special education file redesign in CalPADS, right? You can report meetings or statuses that were effective outside of your enrollment. So if you have evidence that a meeting was held, but the previous district just did not post that record and they're not going to post that record for whatever reason, you can add that record with online maintenance yourself in order to correct the timeline. And then children transitioning from Part C at a regional center not being evaluated for Part B in a timely manner because of inconsistent communication between the district and the regional center. We heard anecdotally that some regional centers are very good at communicating with their LEAs on those students that will be requiring that IEP. Some are not so great. So we recommend that in your MOU with your regional center, specify the frequency at which you expect to receive notifications about students that will be turning 3 and need to have that IEP in place by that 3rd birthday, and set a specific expectation of how much notice. If they're sending out notice, a month in advance, that's not very helpful when it comes to holding that IEP by that 3rd birthday. And it's important to consider that there is only one valid delay code for missing that 3rd birthday, and it's not a common one. So that 3rd birthday timeline for infants is pretty hard. If the student turns 3 on July 5th, that IEP has to be in place, even if it's the summer. And then potential causes for extremely late meetings. You run 16.21 and you see a student that's 1,000 days overdue for the reevaluation. Hopefully that's not accurate. So some things that may cause that. You may have students that are eligible and participating that have exited with an E155 or E156 exit code, which tells CalPADS you expect the student to return in the fall, but the student did not re-enroll. In those situations, work with your student information system administrator to update those exit codes, or post a students with disability status file of eligible and not enrolled. Students exited from special education, but the status record still reflects eligible and participating. For this easy fix, add a status record that updates the student status to reflect accurately, whether it's eligible not participating, eligible not enrolled, or not eligible. more recent meet records missing from CalPAD, whether it's the previous LEA not reporting or maybe your LEA has not reported a meeting record. If you're able to post the record from your special education data system, that's great. Otherwise, add a historical meeting record in online maintenance. And remember, you do not have to have overlapping enrollment for meeting records. You can post meet records regardless of enrollment. Reevaluation is not indicated as such in the meeting record. One of my favorites. Case manager holds a triennial, but only indicates that the meeting was a plan review. Saw this all the time. In this case, if you held the meeting, you can update the meeting record in CalPADS to update the evaluation type code to reflect that a reevaluation was held. If you did not hold the meeting, you can add a meet record in online maintenance with the same meeting date, even though there is a meeting date there already, or a meet record there already with that same meeting date, you can add one of your own. Since it's coming from a different district, CalPADS will allow that. And you can indicate the evaluation type code as evaluation, which will then bring the timeline into compliance. I see a question. Gene, if a student transferred back to the district and was exited from the out-of-state district 4 years ago, should the not eligible and no longer eligible status effective date be the actual date the student exited or the date the student returned to the district? I think probably the best practice would be to have that status be the first day of enrollment or the day before the first day of enrollment. You don't have to go back to the 4-year-old date just for this academic year whenever they started with you, or the day before would be appropriate. Prong 2. So in August, after the window closes, we'll pull the overdue meeting data again. And LEAs are going to be accountable for students that were enrolled, eligible, and participating on Census Day, whose plan review and or reevaluations were overdue at that time, who are still enrolled as of that August data pull, and who are still overdue. Our office, on the first Monday of every month through July, will be sending updated counts to SELPAs so that LEAs can monitor their progress on correcting these timelines as you work towards zero findings. So I saw the email went out yesterday while I was in office hours. It went from Brandy to the SELPA directors. And so LEAs, if the SELPAs have not reached out to you yet, please feel free to contact your SELPA for that information on the current status of your timelines. You can use report 16.21 to identify current students with late meetings as well. So you can run the report as of today, filtering for overdue and meetings held late with a non-compliant delay code or a blank delay code, and compare it in your special education data system. If a later meeting has been held and posted to CalPADS, if there's a valid delay code for meetings that were held late, and if meetings were not held, can you post a pending meeting record with a valid delay code to bring that timeline into compliance? Using report 16.21 to identify the students that transfer in. Again, you can run it as of today. And what you're looking for on 16.21 is the plan LEA code or plan LEA name. That identifies the district that has posted the most recent plan record to CalPAD. So if you run this report and those are not your LEA, that indicates that the student is enrolled with you, but you have not yet adopted the plan. When I generated a sample report for one district, the report had 9 different SELPAs and 16 different districts, which told me that they had not run this report in a while. They had not been adopting plans on a regular basis. Doing this on a regular basis will help avoid that SANR 606E4 error. Tanya, may you repeat the difference between late and overdue? Certainly. So a late meeting has been held, but it was held after the timeline expired. An overdue meeting has not yet been held, but the timeline has expired. So the difference between late and overdue is late means the meeting was held, and overdue means the meeting has not yet been held. Any questions on 16.21 timeline compliance, prong 2, all that fun stuff? All right. Looking forward to 2025-26 because, we don't have anything going on right now. Some proposed changes to Part C. So we'll be collecting 2 new data elements in the plan file, the Part C to B transition conference meeting date and the Part C to B transition plan in IFSP indicator. We're adding a bunch of referring party codes. We worked with our partners in early childhood to come up with some of these. Of particular interest is number 60, California Regional Center. This is an additional way to be able to identify a student that may have been receiving infant services. So if the referral comes through and the referring party is the regional center, that's a good indication that the IEP needs to be in place by that 3rd birthday. It's not guaranteed, but it is a good indicator. And since we do not have all of the Part C students reported to CalPADS, because if they're regionalized, if they're in a regional center, that is reported through the Department of Developmental Services. It does not get reported to CalPADS. New meeting delay code for Part C. For Part C initial, 15 exceptional family circumstances has been added. 15 exceptional family circumstances and delay in parental consent are going to be the only 2 valid delay codes for Part C initial meetings. All other Part C delay code combinations will be retired as of July 1st. We are adding a new meeting delay code for the Part C to B transition, so for the 3rd birthday timeline. It is late referral to Part C. As I mentioned, that 3rd birthday is a very hard timeline. However, there are exceptions in statute. If a student is referred to Part C within 90 days of their 3rd birthday, or if they're referred to Part B within 45 days of their 3rd birthday, then this delay code would apply. And this delay code will excuse missing that 3rd birthday timeline. We've updated the 3rd birthday timeline code combination to remove school break. School break is no longer applicable to missing that 3rd birthday timeline. However, it can be used for the child find, the 60-day timeline. So you can't use school break to excuse missing that 3rd birthday, but if the time between parent consent and the meeting exceeds 60 days, and there is a school break that would be a valid use of that school break code, it can be used for that Part B 60-day timeline. Making some changes to service codes and service location codes. We're retiring service location code 310, Head Start, and 320, Child Development or Child Care Facility. Retiring service code 350, Individual and Small Group Instruction. That code is no longer valid as of July 1st. And we have updated service code definitions, 535, 610, and 865. Another slide I forgot to update because these definitions are all in the newest release of CalPADS system documentation. You can find this on the CalPADS documentation page on the CDE website. Populating degree of support. I know we all have 100% degree of support populated, 100%, no questions, we got it all, right? Right? I can't see your hands or your faces, so I'm just gonna assume you've all got it. And we're just gonna go over this as a refresher. A degree of support is required for the 2025-26 academic year. We've had just over a year to make sure we're populating this during triggering events. So annual plan reviews, reevaluations, initial evaluations or amendments. You have to make sure that this is populated because it is required for Fall 1 and it is going to be used for reporting in CalSAS. Information on how to determine the degree of support can be found in the student degree of support guidance in the meeting materials for this roadshow. And I see some questions. Shelley, I have a follow-up for Jean's Q1. If we use the date prior to the enrollment in our LEA as the exit date, wouldn't that cause the student to be counted as a student with disabilities on some of the CalPADS reports? For example, the cohort 16.x reports, the 15 reports. So So the purpose of having that status be prior to the enrollment date is just to ensure that that enrollment to ensure that that student status is not eligible and participating once the enrollment starts. Again, you don't have to go back several years to use that date. Would it be in the 15.x reports? I don't believe it should. However, I don't know off the top of my head, and we may not have time to investigate that over the course of the rest of this session. So Shelly, if you wouldn't mind submitting a ticket, just include this information and I'll make sure to get the correct information to you. I'm sorry, I don't have that right. Gene, will the service code 350 be replaced by another code? Not that I'm aware of. The changes that I shared earlier are the only changes that I'm aware of with regards to the service codes or locations being added or retired. Denise, is there a report we can pull to ensure all students have the degree of support entered? And Judy answers 16.21 has that field. Yes, you can use report 16.21, or when you are in reporting windows, you can use 16.14 as well. I believe both of those reports will have that information for you. You're welcome. And thank you, Judy. Other local auditing that could impact monitoring and Fall 1. Review those preschool to kindergarten transitions. So the students that will be transitioning from preschool and will be 5 years old entering a TK or kindergarten. Make sure that those plans are updated and the program settings are updated accordingly. Once a student is 5 years old and in TK or higher, they can no longer be reported in an early childhood program setting. It must be updated to a school age program setting, and the general education participation percentage must be reported as well. SACE has a built-in search for this. I know they will bring up all of the students that are 5 years old in TK or kinder and report their program settings and gen ed participation percentages. So you can use that to get ahead of the game. You can also use your data discrepancies to look ahead at your Fall 1 data to see if you have any records that would be triggering that if they're not updated or amended. Additionally, if you're holding a transition meeting or amendment in the spring, but the student is going to be attending kindergarten or TK in a different LEA, we ask that you use a plan effective start date of 1 day before that next school year begins. So if they start school on August 11th, have the plan effective start date be August 10th. That way, once the enrollment begins for the new school, that they can adopt that plan with the plan effective start date equal to that first day of school. And Judy dropped in the chat that SACE search program setting 5 to 22, plan 619, plan 389 F1. Thank you, Judy. Patty asks, does the review of preschool to kindergarten include 4-year-olds who will be in TK? No. They have to meet both criteria, 5 years old and in TK or kindergarten. So if you have a 5-year-old in preschool, you do not need to change that program setting. If you have a 4-year-old in TK, you do not need to change that program setting. And just consider if they're 4 and in TK, and if they turn 5 during the year, if they turn 5 before census day, then you need to make sure that that program setting is updated. Otherwise, once the student turns 5, that program setting should be updated as of that 5th birthday. Review those gen ed participation percentages. So reviewing the percent in that is being reported. If you find instances where the values don't make sense, they seem to be swapped. So I would see this all the time where a case manager had indicated that the student was in gen ed 10% of the day when they meant to indicate 90%. They just put the 90 and the 10 in the wrong boxes. That can become muscle memory. As they go through the process, they might make that same mistake over and over and over again. So if you do spot that, You may wish to take a look at the rest of their caseload to make sure that that error hasn't been perpetuated for all of their students. And then take a look at red flags. Are SDC teachers reporting percent in gen ed values that are super high? Or are SLP or your speech teachers reporting gen ed participation percentages that are super low? If they're just doing a pull out 30 minutes a week, that percentage should be extremely high. So those are some red flags to look for when it comes to that gen ed participation percentage. Hey, we made it. No technical difficulties whatsoever. That was outstanding. This went perfectly. Resources and support, links to the CSIS YouTube channel with the online maintenance demo and other fantastic video guides, the user manual, all the regular stuff here. Any additional questions? Denise asked, if degree of support is blank in CalPAS, will it trigger a data discrepancy? Yes, I believe it will, based on the student's disability codes and whether or not that degree of support is populated. Anna, I used to have a really useful table of what plan effective start date to use when a student turned 5 before, during, and after school starts, but I cannot find it. I do have that somewhere. I probably have it in some of the office hours slides that we conducted last fall, or maybe even in last fall roadshows. If you want to send an email, I can look for that and make sure you have it, and it will also remind me to start bringing it up again. Any further questions? You sat through this for 2.5 hours. I can imagine falling asleep at your desk a little bit here. Judy asked, is there a timeline of when the recording will be posted? It would be super useful for new people to follow along while we're reviewing this data. I don't have a timeline specifically. After the debacle of me promising to finish the SPED data guide by the end of last April, I do not feel comfortable putting timelines out there in the world. With that said, we are going to try to get this out as soon as possible. Well, okay. Thank you all. You have been virtually a great audience. I virtually appreciate everybody who has attended. In all sincerity, thank you all for everything that you do to support our students. How do you download the Q&A? Good question. Is there that option available? It doesn't allow, well, let's see. I don't know. I don't have the option to download the Q&A. I apologize. I think it might save automatically for the host, so I just don't have the option. Can anybody? Oh, okay. We will get the Q&A downloaded. Special Education Division has noted that they will download the Q&A on the back end. And Denise, yes, this has been recorded. Once it is available, we will definitely make sure everybody is aware. And Shelly adds, you can do Control A to select everything and then Control C to copy the whole thing. And then, so that would look something like this. Select everything, copy it, and then open up. I don't know if opening too many applications here is going to crash everything. Buckle up. Let's see what happens. So I hit Control A when I was in the Q&A and then Control C. And now let's see what happens if I paste it. There you go. That worked pretty good. So I see what you said, Rebecca, about the collapsed answers. If that is the case for you, we will have the Q&A available. And Denise, as I said, I'm sorry, I don't have a timeline on the recording, but we will get it out as soon as possible. Thank you all. Again, I appreciate all of you. It was a great time being out on the road and meeting so many of you in person. And I also appreciate you being here with us virtually to experience my technical difficulties firsthand. But with that said, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow at the CalPADS Q&A at 3 o'clock. And thank Brandy and Spirit. I'll be sure to pass that along. That'll be it, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day.